The money that was allocated by the Biden administration, what's left of that continues to flow. There was no way the Biden administration was going to squeeze that tube of toothpaste clean before they left, and that money hasn't been stopped by the Trump administration. Indeed, there's been, for instance, the transfer of Patriot batteries back to Raytheon to be refurbished before moving on back to Ukraine, the transfer of 90 missiles. Patriot missiles. This, I think, is even an addition too. So there is this flood, but the United States is no longer the lead coordinator. We've backed out of the Ramstein coordination group. NATO now has the lead. I think it's the British have the lead on that, and Europe just simply can't do this job. It's the whole thing about the military supply line into Ukraine is collapsing as we speak. They're able to put in spurts in here, but what Ukraine needs is a fire hose, not a garden hose, and they don't have the fire hose anymore. And the other thing is that the Ukrainians, their manpower situation is collapsing on a daily basis. I mean, Zelensky came out with an interesting comment, which is the truth. He says we can't have presidential elections because if we have presidential elections, we'll have to suspend military operations. And the moment we suspend military operations, our army ceases to exist. Everybody will flee the front. There's a huge desertion problem right now. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian troops are fleeing. If you recruit 10 soldiers and send them to the front line, 6 of those are going to desert within a day. And then the others are going to surrender to the Russians, and those that don't surrender die. This is the reality. Ukraine's manpower situation is a crisis that can't be resolved. According to Budanov, the head of their intelligence, Ukraine will cease to exist by the summer of 2025. Now, that could be an exaggeration designed to scare the West. But the fact is the Ukrainians are in a lot of trouble. The longer the peace, the longer they delay implementation of what will be a surrender, the more territory they'll lose, the more manpower they'll lose, and the greater the collapse will be. I don't think Ukraine survives this year, but I didn't think Ukraine was going to survive 2024. It doesn't matter if we keep sending equipment in. There's nobody to operate it, and there's no structure to employ it properly. It just is, wheat and grist for the grinder. In the end of the day, it's up to the Russians to decide, how much pressure they want to put on Ukraine. The more pressure Russia puts on Ukraine from a military standpoint, the more Russian soldiers die. And from Putin's perspective, and I believe this was articulated in a conversation with Donald Trump, the Russians aren't in the mode of let's kill as many Russian soldiers as possible. I think the Russians realize they've won this war, and what they need to do is just continue to put pressure on Ukraine, but in a manner which minimizes Russian casualties. And we're talking about minimizing Russian casualties in a high-intensity conflict situation, which means there's going to be significant casualties no matter what. So I think the Russians are smart enough to know that they have to give Trump a victory. They have to, politically. And they're not going to sacrifice the big picture for something small. So let's see what happens, But like I said, I think a lot of these problems are going to be sorted out, in a face-to-face meeting when the Russians, the Americans finally get down. And the key thing for the American perspective is are the Russians negotiating in good faith? And I think the Russians will come in and negotiate in good faith. I think the Russians know that, if they're going to say that this is fundamental, reality-based, hard power reality, according to Hegseth, they have to demonstrate why that's the case. And they can't come in and make frivolous claims that aren't backed up by, we insist on Odessa and Kharkov. And the Trump guys go, but you don't have any troops in Odessa and Kharkov. I mean, in Kharkov, you got some troops, but, you're going to have to get your troops out of Kharkov. But again, the Russians may say, if we're going to give up the right bank of Kherson, then you're giving up, the area around Kharkov that we currently occupy. That kind of exchange. And every Ukrainian in Kursk will be dead before Russia does any exchange on that. That just isn't going to happen. Russia might be able to play ball with the Novorossiya, trading territory to clean up the boundaries. That's a reality of most conflicts. But I do think that the Russians right now are very realistic. They know that they're getting what they wanted, no NATO for Ukraine. They also understand that Zelensky is out, that there's going to be elections. Here's, the United States is talking about elections. The Russians will seek to control those elections and control the outcome of those elections. So Russia can concede little things up front with the understanding that down the road, with these elections that will be had, that they will get what they conceded back to them anyways. I think that's just the way the Russians are going to negotiate. Trump just wants to get the hell out of Ukraine, and he wants to do it in a way that it saves face. So, you heard Hegseth say there's going to be difficult compromises on both sides. But there won't be a single living Ukrainian in Kursk by the time this thing is done. That's why there is no ceasefire. That's the other big thing that people don't seem to understand. These negotiations are taking place while the Russians continue to, create new realities on the battlefield. And this puts a sense of, and I think it's done deliberately by the Trump administration, because this puts pressure on the Ukrainians. Every day, a negotiation without conclusion is just more territory lost. And the Ukrainians realize you can't just wait this thing out, or else the Russians are going to take everything and you're going to get nothing. And so the Ukrainians will, be called upon to do certain things. The idea that Ukraine is using Kursk as a negotiating leverage is it's just a non-starter. It isn't happening. It doesn't exist. Bloomberg can write about it all they want. The Wall Street Journal can write about it all they want. But I can tell you right now, the perspective from Russia is they don't even consider it. Talk to Abdi Aladanov, one of the Russian commanders in the region. It's not even on. It's not even on on the menu. It's not a possibility. The only possibility for the Ukrainians that are in Kursk is death or surrender. It's just, don't think there's going to be too many prisoners taken anymore. If you're a Ukrainian in the Kursk region, you might want to go home. I think Donald Trump he has bigger things in mind. He has 4 years to, reduce expenditures in America by trillions of dollars. You don't do that by continuing past failed practices. Now, if the model that existed previously about Ukraine was a successful model producing positive outcomes for the United States, Europe, and everybody, then I could see Donald Trump saying, yeah, I'm going to continue that. But it's not a positive model. It's a model of failure. So Donald Trump's not going to double down on stupid. And I don't think the Russians are going to, again, I just point out there was a 90-minute phone call between Trump and Putin. That phone call didn't happen because Donald Trump alone wanted it to happen. It happened because the Russians also wanted it to happen, and both sides were ready for it to happen, meaning that they weren't going to allow little issues and little disagreements to get in the way of the larger picture. There's now a delegation being formed up to begin meeting with their Russian counterparts in Saudi Arabia, start framing out a larger agreement that will be hashed out when Trump and Putin meet in Saudi Arabia. That's the direction we're heading. Putin just invited Trump and President Xi to the 80th anniversary of the May Day celebration. I don't know if Trump's going to make that trip, but I'll tell you what, it would be such a great thing to have a high-level American delegation, maybe led by the vice president, in Moscow on May 9th to participate in this celebration of an alliance. This is the strategic direction we're heading. We're not headed into preserving a broken European system. We're not headed into the place where we're going to sacrifice everything because French sensibilities have been insulted. We're not going to preserve that which has failed. We are headed in a bold new direction. And I just think that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin both recognize the need to move forward. And the Russians are smart enough to know that you have an administration that is understanding of the concept of reality, an understanding of the concept of Russian perspectives. And so I don't think the Russians are going to die on a minor issue. There will be some fundamentals that can't be violated. But I think you'll find that the Russians are amenable to certain things, understanding that, for instance, when we talk about security guarantees, there won't be a European security force because, Europe can't afford it. And no European power is going to go in there. So the United States is going to have to come up with a compromise. So then the Russians will have it. The Russians are the best prepared diplomats in the world. Right now, you have the United States trying to craft together a team. But the Russians have genuine experts, and they're putting together a team right now of some very competent people who are not only going to know what to say about when, projecting Russia's national security requirements, but they're also going to know about what America wants out of this and be willing to make the compromises where they can make compromises to get this thing wrapped up as quick as possible. Neither side wants to go. And again, the fact now that Trump appears to understand Russian realities, that, for instance, if a territory is, called Russian, it's going to be Russian. Now, I don't know. I mean, are the Russians willing to concede the right bank of Kherson as part of some sort of compromise? I mean, that damn river, the Dnieper River, causes, problems, rebuilding that bridge and all that stuff. I don't know. Maybe, and at this point in time, how many Russians are truly left in the right bank? Russian lists, they've been purged, et cetera. So, is that something Russia could make a compromise on? I don't know. Only Russia can make that decision. I think Donetsk has to be totally freed. Zaporizhia and Kherson, there might be some compromises made to straighten out the line, to normalize a border there so that it's not based upon, haphazard domestic borders that, didn't have to take into account, national interests. The Russian perspective is Kursk is ours. Every Ukrainian there will die. And we're not going to allow any situation that ends other than that. So if Ukraine wants to continue to so far, the numbers of sacrifices are closing in on 60,000 dead. 60,000 dead in the Kursk incursion alone. And the Russian perspective is, you're never going to get Kursk. We're never going to agree to that. And if you want to continue to put troops in there, we'll just continue to kill them until they're all dead. That's the reality of it. In the West, we've bought into this romanticism that somehow, the brave Ukrainian incursion into Kursk has created a permanent situation that will enable Ukraine to trade Russian territory for Ukrainian territory. Dream on. That literally is one of the realities. And that's why Russia will never agree to a ceasefire. Because when this conflict ends, every Ukrainian will be out of Kursk. There's talk that the Ukrainians were starting to print ballots for a presidential election. It'd be interesting to see, if they held an election while the negotiations were still taking place, and what would happen if Zelensky was voted out. So this is we live in interesting times right now, but I do believe that the Trump administration and the Russian government are going to negotiate in good faith to bring this conflict to an end. And once the war in Ukraine ends, and once the situation becomes resolved and the border becomes defined, the American troops are out. There's not going to be a permanent American large-scale presence of American military power in Poland. We're done with Europe. Hegseth said, Fortress America, he used that term, and he said we're pivoting to the Pacific. We're unplugging from Europe. I think right now, I think the primary will be Germany. I think the way Vance was talking is that he's disgusted with Germany, disgusted with what Germany has become, and that when he was in Poland, he spoke about, maybe even more American troops coming into Poland. So I think what you're going to see is 20,000 American troops going home, and headquarters staffs that were in Germany relocating to Poland. He said that that's essential until the Ukrainian border is defined. But here's the thing about the Poles. Those troops aren't there forever. So even if it's a temporary reallocation of resources to Poland, the Poles need to understand that that's temporary, that long-term we're looking for peace with Russia, not a permanent state of conflict with Russia. We're looking to resolve those issues, and the Poles better get on board, because we're not going to be there to hold their hands. And at the end of the day, when we leave, Poland's going to have to be able to either be big enough to stand up to Russia, why Russia isn't looking for a war, or change their mindset. And again, I think you'll find as this wave of change, the reality of the necessity for change sweeps over Europe, governments one by one are going to fall that can't get in line with the new reality. There's not going to be any governments that survive long term who say, no, we're standing up to America. No, you're not. No, you're not. You understand there's a president right now that will stop all LNG shipments to Europe in a heartbeat. He'll just turn the ships around. Say, I could go sell them to Asian markets. A lot of the Asians are a little pissed. We want to compete with the Russian gas in China. And you had the Chinese foreign minister say, why should we stop buying Russian gas? It's there, it's readily available, and who's going to provide gas to replace it? Don't tell us what to do. But the United States might say, well, we want to start competing in that market more by reallocating LNG shipments that are headed to Europe. And then the Europeans are now screwed because A, they're going to have to buy on the spot market, which is going to make the prices explode. And B, they're going to have to buy Russian gas because there's no other alternative. What happens when Donald Trump says, now we're done with NATO? Now Europe's going to have to come in and set their own table. See, Trump and Russia can create their own reality just by coming up with an agreement. Now, there's lip service going to be paid for Europe and this and the other thing. But, the bottom line is they said America's not putting troops on the ground in Europe, in Ukraine. Zelensky said he can't even consider a peacekeeping force without American troops. So now there's not going to be a peacekeeping. But let's say he changes his mind. Okay, I'll take those Europeans. I'll take 100,000 Europeans. But then the United States said, yeah, but you don't get Article 5 protection. So any Europeans that go in there, you're not part of NATO, which means if you piss the Russians off and they kill you all, you're on your own. And there's not a single European nation that's going to do that. So how can Trump make an agreement without Europe? I just told you how. Europe doesn't matter. Trump can make whatever rules he wants to, and Europe will have to fall in. It's an American-based reality as far as Europe's concerned. It's a Russian-based reality as far as solving the issue of Ukraine is concerned. And I think that Trump is willing to do what's necessary to concede to Russian realities. You heard Hegseth talk about it. And so that's the reality. There's going to be no American troops, no NATO. We're cutting off military support for Ukraine, which means Europe's going to have to step up. And, the price tag gets really, really outrageous at this point in time. It's not just, Europe proved they can't afford the 2% GDP that was necessary to make NATO viable. That's why NATO's so weak. But now, in order to, be part of an American participation, they needed to get that number up to 5. None of them can afford that. And now America's pulling out. That participation, taking the lead now is 10 to 15%. It's it. Europe can't take the lead. The realities. Screw Europe. Ukraine will never, ever, ever, ever be a member of NATO. It's as simple as that. I don't care. You can have, Starmer, we are committed to Ukraine being. No, you're not. Remember, NATO is a consensus-based organization. And when Big Daddy says no, that's the end of it. End of discussion. Kids don't no longer get to scream, we want chocolate. Daddy said no. What you got Sweden now? The newbies regretting their vote already to join NATO, saying, no, they're going to be part of NATO. We guarantee it. No, they won't. Ukraine will never, ever, ever be part of NATO. It doesn't matter how many pathetic European leaders come out and say so. It isn't going to happen because Big Daddy said no. So the realities will define this situation. That's how it happens. Because Europe can't do anything. They can't do anything. We'll set the conditions. You have to pay for it all, Europe. You have to go in. No protection from Big Daddy. You want to play big, jump in the playing field with Russia and try to impose some sort of security arrangement in Ukraine without Russian concurrence? It's on you. And when Russia bombs you, Daddy ain't going to be there to help you. They just defined the fact that Europe can't do it. So it's not about keeping the Europeans out. Europe can't even come in and play the game. They can't buy into the table. The United States and Russia have set a high-stakes poker game. And Europe wants to come in with a handful of $5 chips. It doesn't work that way. You got to bring the $1,000 chips and you got to have a whole bunch of them. And they don't. We're not talking about Russia attacking Poland. We're talking about Poland threatening Russia by initiating offensive military operations that they don't have the ability to do. So no, nobody's a threat to Russia. And that's the reality. And because Russia knows this, Russia's not overreacting. Russia's done what is necessary to strengthen its borders because Finland and Sweden joined NATO. Russia has to respond. That's why they have 70,000 troops in the new St. Petersburg military district. So they solved that problem. They reinforced Kaliningrad as necessary. They reinforced up in the Kola Peninsula as necessary. They've given Belarus nuclear weapons and Oreshnik. Again, come on, Poland, really bring it on. Nothing that Lukashenko would like to any more than to go fire, release the Oreshnik and let 9 Belarus Oreshniks fire into Poland and kill everything it touches. There's not a single European nation that threatens Russia. There's not a collection of European nations that threaten Russia. Poland's nothing. Nothing. Literally nothing. What are they going to do? Invade? Poland will do nothing. Nobody in Europe will do anything. They can't. I, again, ask people to take a look at the true state of affairs of the Polish military. They may have a lot of soldiers, but now try and take those soldiers, organize them in a fashion where they can project power in an offensive strike, thrusting deep through Belarus, through Ukraine to actually threaten Russia. Imagine the logistics problems that are created by that, lines of communication. Then imagine them trying to survive as the Russians, destroy their entire logistical infrastructure in Poland with longer-range strike missiles that Poland doesn't have a defense against, destroys the Polish Air Force in place, destroys Polish command and control, destroys the Polish energy infrastructure, and isolates and annihilates every one of the troops that got extended forward. The entire Polish army would be destroyed. That's the true reality of NATO. It's a joke. It's a farce. It's fake. And now you have the Europeans talking about creating a European army. With what command structure? How is that going to work? Are the French going to subordinate themselves to the Poles? Because the Poles say, we're a frontline state. We have to be in command. You think Germans are going to let the Polish command German troops? It isn't going to happen. America commands because we kicked everybody's ass. We were large and in charge. But when we withdraw, the British? What moral authority do the British have? How many troops do they bring? They used to have the British Army on the Rhine, 90 to 100,000 strong. Not anymore. Now they can't even fill up a soccer stadium. So the British are going to be in charge? The Poles? Nobody's going to listen to the Poles. The French? They've got nothing. They can't bring anything. The Germans? They're confused. There's going to be an election coming up, in March? And AfD may win. And when that happens, God help Europe. Because you think J.D. Vance, put a turd in the punch bowl with his speech in Munich? Wait till AfD says, yeah, we're out of the European Union. And then now Sikorsky's great plan for Europe. There will be no more Europe. Germany withdraws from the European Union. It's dead. It's gone, finished. So it's all fantasy right now. It's just stupid. Sikorsky's the same idiot that posted a photograph of the gas bubbling up after the Nord Stream attack and said, thank you, America. This is the level of intellectualism that we're dealing with here. So why do you take anything this man says seriously? He's not a serious player. He's a Russophobe. He's irrational, and his words have no link to real power. Nothing he says is going to happen at all. Just imagine this too. I mean, I had to laugh when I heard Trump say that he wants to invite Russia back into the G7. The Russians came out and went, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. We're part of the organization of the largest economies in the world, and the G7. Hardly any of those people could qualify. And think about it. Great Britain's economy, non-qualifying. The French economy, the German economy, nope. The Italian economy, nope. Europe doesn't have a functioning economy. I mean, yeah, it's there, but it's not a world leading. This isn't the G7 is no longer the elites that sit down. The Indians are sitting there chewing their meal, going, waving at the Europeans, going, how do you guys like that? We're up here in first class. How's that? You're not even in business class, are you? Yeah, that's right. Economy. The Russians are living large right now. Europe's nothing. They're finished. It's hasta luego. Goodbye. Europe is pathetic. Europe is weak. Europe is nothing, but they can't admit it because they fooled themselves into believing there's something, and they're not. Everything about her exudes artificiality, hypocrisy, but she's a nobody. That's all Europe is. It's economy class, not even the good economy class, where you pay a little bit extra and you get the extra knee space. They're back in the real bad economy class where we're all crammed in. That's all they rate. And soon they're just going to be baggage. They don't even get a seat. So you make the mistake of believing they actually care about Ukraine or trying to do the right thing by Ukraine. They condemned 1 million Ukrainians to die. That's what they did. They did it because they have a artificial understanding of Europe's role in the world. They think Europe's a player. Europe's not a player. Peace through strength. Well, good luck with the strength part. I mean, that's like, me going to the gym with a young Arnold Schwarzenegger and bragging about how strong we are as a team. Strength, baby, strength. We're so strong. And then Schwarzenegger leaves, and I'm left there looking at the weight room going, and everybody's like, where's that strength now, Ritter? I lost Schwarzenegger. Europe only has strength when America's involved. We are the strength. We are the only strong partner out there. No one else in Europe has any strength, any measurable strength. And so why do they keep talking about it? I mean, Europe can't pony up. They don't have anything to put on the table. They don't have any viable military force. None. NATO is a fake entity, a paper tiger, artificiality. It only works with America. We not only have to be the glue that holds it all together, but once we put it all together, we then have to bring in the Schwarzenegger-like character to be the real strength, because Europe is just a pathetic old man who can't lift weights anymore, like me. So I don't know why we keep playing her, and I don't know why we keep playing Collis, and I don't know why we keep playing any of these European officials. They don't matter. The only people in Europe that matter are national leaders. But the national leaders that have subordinated themselves to Europe have made themselves irrelevant, like Olaf Scholz. Look at the panic of Scholz right now. I have to declare a national emergency now. Why? Because America's not backing us up. Oh, you've decided you want to be a sovereign nation state now, a national emergency, because you realize that Europe is fake. And America's not there to hold your hand. And wait till he finds out we're pulling out 20,000 troops. I mean, I think that's the number. It might be more. Because we're just done with Europe. Europe is a failed experiment. Where's the European army? There is no European army. Even under NATO, there is no NATO army. It's just dysfunctional. NATO's history. The United States is about ready to pull the plug. And Europe's going to have to wake up to the fact that they're going to need a new military framework that doesn't involve the United States, which means NATO is dead. And that's the best thing that could happen to Europe, and the best thing that could happen to the world is to kill this creature that got Europe turned into being a continent that sought to be defensive in nature, not offending anybody, remembering the lessons of their past imperialism, to now they're okay with bombing Belgrade. Everybody forgets about that. The Russians are bombing a European city. Yeah, because NATO bombed Belgrade. Regime change in Libya. Nation building in Afghanistan. I mean, Libya and Afghanistan. They're talking about opening offices in the Pacific. How did NATO become this? It become an extension of American imperial warmongering. And now we have a president that says we're not doing that anymore. America's redefining its relationship in the world. We're more focused on the economic and less focused on the military. You saw what he said yesterday. Wants to cut the defense budget in half. Wants to engage in nuclear disarmament, real nuclear disarmament. He said there's no need to continue building nuclear weapons. We should be getting rid of them. And the United States is just saying, and here's the thing, we don't care what happens to Europe if they can't get on board. I mean, you have this Collis lady talking about there can't be a peace treaty, without Europe involved. Oh, yes, there can, because you don't matter. Let me remind Europe of two simple facts. You put pressure on Zelensky to change the constitution of Ukraine that said there can be no negotiations with the Russians. And then you said there will be no negotiations with the Russians And then you said, well, there can only be negotiations when the Russians lose, and therefore we have to build up a military and go to war and bring the Russians down. And now what you have a situation where the Russians ain't going to lose. You're not going to beat them. And the United States got tired of playing your game, so we bypassed you and went straight to the Russians and say, let's fix this thing. And now you have the Europeans and Ukraine saying, well, we demand a seat at the table. You didn't want a table to begin with. You said there will be no negotiation table. Trump and Putin sat down and said, screw you. We're setting our own table. And now you want a seat? You're not getting a seat at this table. Not at all. You can be present. You can serve us. You can be the wait staff. You can clear out the dirty dishes. You can clean up our dirty silverware. You can deliver the food that we're going to eat. But if you think you're sitting down at the table and joining in at the feast, think again. You opted out. And this is the reality. I mean, who the hell does this callous lady think she is? Does she have any power? None. Zero. Von der Leyen, does she have any power? None. Zero. None. The only thing that gives them power is the fact that there are sufficient nations within the European framework that continue to act in concert based upon what these people say, but not on anything serious. If you don't understand that there has been a fundamental sea change in how America is looking at approaching the world, then I guess you'll continue to be shocked by what's happened here. For me, I'm thrilled to death because this is exactly what I've been saying is the only thing that can save America. And frankly speaking, the only thing that can save the world. America had to redefine its relationship with the world. And Donald Trump's working on doing that. Is he perfect? Nope, not even close. Is everything he's articulating capable of being implemented as articulated? No, but it's a start. It's a start. It's a change. And it scares the hell out of everybody. And that makes me so happy.